Alright everyone, we start off today on Easter Sunday. Of course, it's a pagan fertility festival, but I'll get into that with probably a live stream later. I'm not sure what time that'll be at. We start off today talking about this piece, link in the description, archived of course. It's from MSNBC. I realize it's an opinion piece, but they carefully cherry pick what goes on there. So their opinion pieces tend to conform to the general consensus of MSNBC's editorial staff, at least at large. Claiming that the Democrats are doomed in the midterms. I happen to agree. But the encouragement is to double down on pressing their agenda. That is the ideas that the Democrats at large have had. Now, this reminds me, a few weeks ago actually, of a bit by AOC. And I agreed with her. See, she said, well, the Democrats are having all these problems, it's a mess. The problem is the MSNBC leftoid crowd, they're more ideologically closer to that far left fringe, the cringe fringe as I call them. They're formerly Gang of Four, now there's 7 of them in the House. Closer to that than the corporate sweater liberals, like the NPR listeners with their fair trade coffee. And so the suggestion that's given makes no sense. I'll analyze this because, again, it's got that AOC feel to it. It's almost like she had a ghostwriter write this for MSNBC. Anyway, first and foremost, keep in mind down below, if you're watching this video on YouTube, there will be a pinned comment with links to other video hosting sites that I use. Keep in mind I make exclusive content every day on those platforms that does not go on YouTube. So if you're watching there, you're only getting half your daily clank, sometimes less, unless there's non-political content. That goes on all platforms. YouTube doesn't have a problem with book videos and occultism and gardening and stuff. But here's the premise. The premise is the midterms are gone. The Democrats expect to lose the House. It's just a matter of whether it's a normal, victory for the Republicans, because generally speaking, the House you will lose seats in the House. And unless you've had a significant advantage, the tendency is for the House to flip. That's been the case in 90% of where the incumbents, it's the midterms now, elections over the last 100 years. So that wouldn't be abnormal. What they're looking at now, though, is not they have, a 5-seat loss in the House. They're looking at the possibility of a legendary knockout sort of blow that sees them robbed of 25 or more seats. I would say at the moment, if it were held today, it'd be closer to 35, maybe 40. So a huge loss. It'll be sort of like the Tea Party upswing, of course, in 2010. As a result of this, the Democrats have various possible ways to compensate. They're looking at a midterm loss. Do you then push forward an agenda, or do you realize that the reason why you're expecting a loss is due to your own folly? The leftoids don't understand that. That's the truth. The truth is that the Democratic Party is in large part through pro-lockdown rhetoric at the federal level. Not federal policy, but it trickles down to the states that happen to be run by Democrats or rhinos, Phil Scott and some others. Certainly not the case in the Dakotas or in Texas or in Florida. There's a reason why some parts of the country economically are doing better. You have Biden price hikes. That's going to get blamed squarely on Biden and the incumbent Democrats of the House. They control the purse strings. If anything, the House is more responsible for economic things than the president tends to be. I realize that the states are more responsible than anyone else, but if you look at the states that continued with the inflationary lockdownerism, there's a pretty heavy correlation with being run by the Democrats at the executive level, and certainly to an extent the legislative level. But the average person in the public doesn't understand the supremacy of state policy with regards to economics, etc., with everything other than like military and federal spending. And you've had a presidency which has now pushed 3 massively inflationary bills to the tune of, I think, in total $5 trillion. And their answer is attempting to blame Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine for the current economic situation. Unmedicated individuals, and I love seeing how Gen Z, of all groups in the United States, is the one that has swung most heavily against Biden, and it's actually people over 65 that still kind of support the dude. That's because the youth is more tuned into the internet, I think, and has seen the infographic. Hey, here's the inflation rate. This is when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. As you can see, the gas prices, the inflation, the border problem, all of the crime, all of these things were already issues. You have to have the attention span of a gnat not to understand that. I love seeing that Gen Z and secondarily millennials are the ones swinging against him. This speaks good things about younger voters within the United States. It doesn't speak so well for the boomer people. But you got to realize the boomers have more aggregated wealth, so fewer of them are being affected so far by the inflation. Hasn't touched the upper middle class yet. They'll grumble about the price of their Twix bar or, their bran muffin, if you happen to be like in Biden's age range. But it's not going to break the bank. With younger people, Gen Z, they're starting out in the business world. Millennials got robbed several times of all possibility of wealth. Now we're in our fucking 30s. It stings. It's become a problem. You don't have nearly as many people that would qualify as comfortably upper tier middle class or above within those generations. I think really it's economics. I think that's why the other possibility in some parts of the country, borderland USA, you got a bunch of young Hispanics. They're not, recent immigrants. They're third, fourth gen now. And they're being robbed of a future. If you look at a map of the trajectory demographically, those are the areas in which the Democrats have lost the most support. It's deadly for them in Texas. It endangers their capabilities certainly in Arizona, also New Mexico to an extent, although that leaned more blue. Texas was already slightly leaning red. It's going back in the other direction after 20 years of slowly marching more towards the Democrats based on 90s and 2000s style id poll. Now it's swung back in the other direction. I would say this. If the Democrats are smart, they will not try to ram through an agenda because their agenda is the reason for their problems. If you then ram through more inflationary spending, more of the same kind of policies, the tone-deaf, optics-poor, hey, it's still 1995. Hey, we're giving you welfare breadcrumbs. Yeah, the prices have doubled in some cases on goods, but we're giving you 10 cents more a month. Why don't you suck our ass? If they continue to do that, they'll lose even more in the midterms. The problem for the leftoids is that if they were successful in this kind of suggestion, the AOC, Ilhan Omar, etc. crowd, and if they do push forward a radical agenda, especially if they did it now so that some of that damage would probably show up right before the midterms, they'll lose so badly that Biden potentially gets knocked out of office. He gets impeached. He loses the will of the House. The House makes it clear, look, you're completely nuts. They spend every day on TV reminding people that he's clearly demented. At some point, he gets 25th potentially, causing chaos, causing uproar. And the Democrats' cries of, well, it's an insurrection. This is a Russian coup attempt. Have they worked so far? It doesn't seem so. It seems like saying Russia, 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 hey, it's not really our fault, it's Putin's fault. Ignore the last year of economic data. By the way, black and white people and so forth, the id poll side of things, gender awareness, it's almost like that's not working, but they want to double down on it while pushing those same economic policies. You got the other problem of the fact that you don't technically have the will of the Senate. Manchin and Sinema especially, and to an extent several other Democrats in the Senate have made it clear they're not willing to play ball on any more inflationary rhetoric. The damage is already done. You can expect at least a few more months before it peaks. And then of course, with the latest funny money spending, that's going to show up during harvest season, especially with the one thing that Russia will have done to fuck the U.S. economy will become evident around August and September, when some of the marginal parts of the U.S. begin to bring in the harvest, and all of those goods cost more. Or, and this is my prediction, I think that Biden will propose an additional bill that may gain traction and actually pass to subsidize those costs to try to keep the cost of goods down, thus causing even more inflation, which means that the cost will still have risen. It's just that the poor and middle class will have absorbed it once again, like they did with the infrastructure funny money. Shovel-ready 2.0. Has it helped? The infrastructure spending? Is the economy good? No. There's a reason for that. It was never meant to help anyone. The American Rescue Plan, so to speak, in the dawn of Biden's administration, which is where much of this inflation is coming from now. Did it help? Do you feel more wealthy? Are things going well, or are they going to hell? Well, they're going to hell. Now you got MSNBC showing how stupid they are, especially about economic issues. They're leftoids, so it makes sense, by proposing that the Democrats double down and ram it through even more. We got to take care of that goddamn Manchin dude. He sounds like a Republican now. He's done the right thing for his constituents. And that's really the other problem, is that while the Democrats are a very top-down, centralized, federal-level party, which is not good at times like this, by the way. It's not a help at times at this moment. You've got several Democratic senators in a 50-50 Senate that come from states that are very red. West Virginia, especially with Manchin, more important because West Virginia is also quite religious and quite poor. In Arizona, you've got Sinema. She represents a demographic that is leaning slightly red. The leftoids are crazy enough to be talking about primarying her out. Well, we need someone who's just going to toe the party line. Well, that makes it look even more optically poor. People are getting tired of the doubling down on failed policies. You have failure at the border. You have a failure of diplomacy with Ukraine, and not just Ukraine, by the way, at this point. Taking a backseat to fucking Germany. As it happened before. Not a great idea. You've got a failure with crime. Garland comes out and says, well, we're going to go after ghost guns. What the fuck is that going to do about the rise in gang crime due to your revolving door policies towards ideological fanatics on the far left who are responsible for an increased upsurge in crime in many of these areas? Or street gangs. You're emboldening them by pumping in millions of illegal immigrants that disappear into the woodwork, including small children that I expect mostly are now in the sex slave trade. I'm sure Biden is very happy. His friends are certainly happy about this fact. This is not helping anyone. You're not even helping the non-American individuals you claim to want to help. The Ukrainians aren't being helped by Biden's policy. The pussyfooting around, okay, I'll belatedly send some more heavy weaponry. After our diplomacy fails, after Russia invades and there's nothing we can directly do, now we're going to pump you full of weapons. Yeah, as VP, I could have pressed Obama to do a midnight session admitting you to NATO preventing this, or we could have just played nice and said to the Russians, look, they're never going to be in NATO. I know that they're trying to petition, but we'll make sure that doesn't happen. You wouldn't even have the situation now. Biden is the central cause, if not the sole cause in all cases, of virtually all the problems that we're having right now. Pushing forward an agenda that requires him to sign his name to it and will cause more inflation is probably the opposite of what they should do. If I were a Democratic leader, I'd come out on TV with a very solemn look. I've done some soul searching. We realize that we've gotten off to a really bumpy start and we beg people's apologies. We're going to retool some things. We realize that maybe socialism should not be the way that we go forward with. Yeah, we hear you loud and clear that giving you welfare breadcrumbs based on the shade of your skin color is no longer working for you, so we'll try something different to hoodwink you. That's about all. Peace out.